Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak, and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Dr. Kalua Isaac Green is an ecopreneur. Dr. Ahmed Idris is the Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross. And Dr. Stephen Jackson is the United Nations Resident Coordinator here in Kenya. Yes, Dr. Ahmed, you had a point.
Shukran. Thank you. So let's just take everything in context. And this is the context. The effects that we are facing now is as a result of the climate crisis. I think there's the general agreement that there's an increase in climate-induced disasters across the world by up to about 83% in the last 20 years. So we have settled the question on whether there is a linkage, a causation relationship between the disasters we are facing, the extreme climate events, and the climate crisis and the climate change as a whole. So let's give that as, accept it as given. Now let's look at the impact it's having on countries such as Kenya. In the developing countries need up to about $300 billion every year for purposes of mitigation and adaptation to the climate crisis. Kenya will need $65 billion until 2030 to be able to just adapt to the impact of climate change. So, second, look at the impact every year on our economy. The fiscal liabilities that these kind of disasters are having on our economy, up to as high as 5% of the GDP every year, meaning that we are reversing opportunities for developmental growth for the country. Now, what does that mean? One, we're paying for something that we didn't cause, and that's the first thing. Okay. The second thing is that the developed countries are not serious enough to put money on the table to support developing countries adapt seriously. $100 billion was promised the last few years, and nothing has been put into the table. In fact, the shortage in terms of adaptation funding globally, up to 10 times what is needed by the developing countries. So there's a serious ethical question on the table around why poor communities in Tana River, in Baringo, in Nyando, should be paying for the indiscipline of the developed world. And that's the real question on the table. And if some of us have been very cynical about Kenya's attempt to take a leading front in the climate diplomacy debate, and this is the reason why Kenya as a country ought to continue investing in a discussion on the global climate diplomacy. The Office of the Special Climate Envoy, P.S. Ali Daoud, is one of the most central offices right now in this country to be able to lead the conversation and to place Kenya centrally on the table so that we're able to address the long-term needs of these communities. We are not just worried about the medium-term impacts. We're not talking about the 6 months, 1 year in terms of food security. Kenya as a country by 2050 will have a yield reduction of up to 45% of the total yield on maize, on corn, on beans, if we continue on this trajectory. So there has to be a discussion not just on the needs of the developing countries, and as we say, we cannot find a humanitarian solution to a development problem. This is a development problem, and it has to be treated in that manner.
All right. Dr. Kalua Green, I'll come to Dr. Stephen on the same, because it took Alok Sharma to shed a tear during the Glasgow Climate Conference in 2021 to convince parties to come to a conclusion about the agreements, because the Saudis had their own version, the Indians had concerns, the Americans had their own concerns, so as the Europeans. Dr. Kalua Green, the government spokesperson, Dr. Isaac Mwaura, said nobody will be allowed to get back to riparian lands when this disaster will be over. But here is the fundamental question. How were they first allowed to settle in such lands? And then the second, how are buildings on such lands approved? Because they have to go through the necessary processes by the government before approvals are given, and to that effect, inspections are done. Doesn't this also point to failure in terms of responsibility on the part of those who are in authority at the time and now, as to doing an audit of establishing how this had happened and bring the persons responsible to book, even as we now roll out the assistance to those in need of aid?
Very good question. And I really pick it up from where my brother Idris has taken it, indiscipline. There is indiscipline out there. There is indiscipline locally. And for us to understand all this, we need to take the magnitude of the mess that as a country, either individual, corporate, or wherever, where have we taken it up to? By doing so, I have alluded earlier on that people move to where development is. The next action is that politicians move to where people are, because they are attracted by people so that they can now move development to the next stage. Then what is expected to happen is that the government needs now to take it up to the next level, that we can be able to bring the development, and strategically so. Now, magnitude of the mess. Let us take figures as they are, because I believe figures help us to understand these things. Every flood that happens in this country, we lose 4.76 tons of soil per hectare. Now, it's easy, and I always say, whenever we speak to the people, let's help them to bring it down to a point that they can understand. 4.76 tons per acre means we have a country that is 580,000 square kilometers, and therefore maybe about, if you calculate by that amount of 4.76, you have 276 million tons of soil that is flushed out from our land. This is topsoil, very quality soil, that goes out somewhere to the sea, wherever it is displaced. If you calculate over the last 10 years, you find that we have lost 2.76 billion tons of soil. Now, what is that magnitude? I was looking at Lake Nakuru, 40 kilometers square. It would fit in Lake Nakuru about 18 times soil. The Lake Naivasha is 140 tons, 40 square kilometers. It would, that kind of soil would actually fill in Lake Naivasha 18 times. The the hills that we see at Ngong Hills, they are much less in terms of size of soil than that. The same soil, and I'm just trying to bring this magnitude, would fill the entire county of Nairobi by 1.7 meters, the entire Nairobi. What we are losing in 10 years, if you calculate it, this amount for that region. How then, what are we doing to change this? This is affecting food, as he's talking about. This is affecting the livelihoods, as we have talked about. What then do we need to be able to do to understand this? Politicians, we must understand who the politician is. Politicians, their agenda is inversely proportionate to their areas of jurisdiction that they manage. The lower and the smaller the jurisdiction, the more they lose the vision. That is why you may be able to see. And you can't blame them, because they are talking about time and space where their votes come from.
Okay.
That is why you'll see, and I'll use an example of my friend, Sakaja, of the city of Nairobi, that when extension is expected of the city, yes, that he will imagine that going up is the solution. When there is a collaboration opportunity with the city of Machakos, the county of Kiambu, Kajiado, and others, because they wouldn't want to think beyond their jurisdiction. They want to focus on where everything is coming in. It is our opportunity now to start thinking, what can we be able to do to stop the mess that we are doing? I like the focus on the immediate, which we must deal with. We need a lot of money, there is no question. What are we doing at the individual level? This, we only have an opportunity of about a month or less to start mapping out the space where people are living. Create the 30 meters. Now that you can see water is up to this level. The argument when it is dry is totally different. Now people can listen. What are the rebate opportunities that we can give and indulge corporate institutions to start doing and developing the river lines so that we can be able to protect this? How can we work on the project of housing that the government is pushing on, to have people move in corporate manner so that they can be able to stay and leave land in one space.
All right.
How do we discuss with politicians so that they are not moving to where people are because they have already moved in the wrong places, but they are deliberately, the county government, the responsibility. The county governments have got 2% of their budget for disaster.
Okay.
Is that money being accounted for?
We'll talk about
what can that be able to do. So these are things that we need to start asking ourselves at a very early stage so that we don't lose the eye from the ball.
Okay, yes, Dr. Stephen. Given the account you have talked about of the climate question here, what we are talking about today are more than or nearly 300,000 people who are internally displaced. Let's label them the climate IDPs. Some are fleeing away from the flooding. In the case of Nyando in the county of Homa Bay, Nyando in Kisumu, the county of Homa Bay, in Baringo yesterday. But you have a case in Tana River County where it hasn't rained, but because of overflooding by the Tana River, people still are displaced. How do we then address this question of climate IDPs within their own country who have no food, who have no basic needs such as sanitation?
Well, you're pointing absolutely to the challenge. And as Dr. Idris said, I mean, it is established science now that we have extreme weather events that are more frequent. When they come, they're deeper and they're longer. They affect more people and for a longer period of time. And they're coming one on top of the other. So we are now dealing, as you say, with the climate displaced, where we have a new term of art, climate refugees as well, who are crossing international borders as a result of emergencies like this. And the world has not re-geared for this. Idris already pointed out just how much the gulf is between the ability and willingness of those who caused the problem to pay for the problem. And those who caused the problem are people largely who look like me and come from countries like I do, who burned fossil fuels for 150 to 200 years. We know that there is a massive gap between what is needed to help countries like Kenya adapt and contend with the climate emergency and what's actually on the table. And that's why I think if your listeners will pardon me, if I can throw a flower or two to our president, the foresight of bringing everybody on the continent together for the Africa Climate Summit last year. Because what he was saying with that summit is we have to think differently about this challenge. We have to start thinking about it perversely, and I know it's hard when everybody is facing an existential crisis of the kind we have with the flooding. We have to start thinking about it as one of opportunity as well. Africa, as well as being the continent that is in the crosshairs of the climate emergency, is also the solution to the climate emergency, because this is the continent that has the critical minerals, it has the carbon sink in terms of the forests and the mangroves and the rangelands. It's the continent that has the arable land for sustainable food production. It's the continent that has the renewable energy resources. So actually, Africa has the things that Europe and North America needs to bring down their addiction to fossil fuels. If only we can bring those solutions to the global marketplace. So long term, that's the solution to the problem that Idris is pointing to. But in the short run, how do we contend? How do we help a country like Kenya contend with this extraordinary, this break that I described before on the country's development trajectory? Kenya would be growing so much faster. And Kenyans' livelihoods would be growing so much faster were it not for this climate emergency problem that Kenya and Kenyans didn't cause.
Yeah, okay. Dr. Ahmed, coming to you then. Talking about that growth Dr. Stephen has talked about. For example, if you focus on the northeastern part of the country, in November last year, the road between Madogashi and Garissa was washed off. And we did cover that story. And now we are talking about the road that links Nairobi and Garissa, where people can't access Garissa County, by extension Wajir and Mandera counties. Two questions. How have years of underdevelopment contributed to this in terms of infrastructure expansion across the region? And then second, with devolution, almost 14 years, and let's say now 11 years since we had the first government after the constitutional order that we are in at the moment. How are the counties also responding by virtue of what they get from the exchequer with regards to such disasters?
Yeah. So we started the discussion from the perspective of saying that it is developing countries that are bearing the brunt. Now, even within developing countries, it is the impact is not the same. It's the poorest population are suffering more, and the most marginalized counties and regions of the northern Kenya, the far-flung counties of Mandera, Garissa, Wajir, Marsabit, Turkana, Baringo, and so on, are bearing the brunt of this disaster. Two things are cumulatively having that impact. One, there is a development challenge, an infrastructure problem, where a little bit of rain, there is completely no movement. And that reverses the economic growth in those areas. So it's a compounded effect. Poor people are getting poorer because of these particular emergencies and these disasters. So that's the first one. Second, the most central actors that can have an impact in this climate risk planning are the counties. I think the constitutional architecture in the country places the counties at the center of development planning. And I think it's a responsibility counties have to discharge and have to take seriously in discharging that. We have to do it by doing the development planning within the counties to be climate proof. Let's start with that one. And that's the discussion that my friend Dr. Kalua was raising. The counties like Nairobi, like many other counties, have to take their development planning schedule seriously so that climate risk mitigation, climate risk planning is part of development planning. Disaster risk management planning is part of the development planning. So that's a responsibility that applies to all the counties. Has this been discharged?
Yes.
That's another question. I think the jury is still out there on whether we have used the resources that are available within our counties in the most appropriate manner. But to answer your question, let's point and ask ourselves, is the economy, are the people's lives improving in these counties? If the answer is no, then at the end of the day, those people who are in leadership in these counties have to have a very introspective discussion with themselves on what they are doing for their counties and the kind of leadership they are providing. Because this is a huge responsibility. For a very long time, I come from northeastern Kenya, I come from Garissa. For a very long time, we used to blame a national level, a centralized development planning cycle as the cause of poverty in the country. Granted, by the way, I agree that 50 years of marginalization in that region cannot be reversed by 10 years of devolution. I accept that. But at least we all agree that we should be seeing an impact in terms of the development of the communities, some level of improvement. What does it call for? That as a country, whenever we talk about disaster risk management, climate mitigation planning, we cannot afford not to put it in the context of public governance cycles. Just improving our public governance architecture as a whole, our accountability measures, our reduction on loss of funds to rent-seeking, corruption and fraud, the prioritization of the needs and proper planning that puts people at the core, at the center of planning in the country. And that discussion is taking place within our communities. For a very long time, by the way, we never used to have a discussion in our counties, Wajir, Garissa, and Mandera, around what development meant for us as a people who come from those areas. And now I'm happy that that is taking place. The question is our leadership being responsive to the needs of the communities? Are we doing planning from the top or community-centered planning? Are we asking people for their priorities? Are we integrating the 10-year development plans in those countries to be climate proof and to respond to the needs of the communities?
Dr. Kalua Girin, then if we are to track this conversation about the allocations that ought to be done by the counties, then our first point of focus will be what happened at the Makueni Boys High School in Makueni County 2021, when the devolved units had gathered there for the annual devolution conference, and it was themed multi-level governance for climate action. If you are to take stock of what has happened ever since then, are these allocations put to that effect? Is there awareness, comprehensive one, around climate change with regards to proximity that the counties in terms of leadership have with the people, and make people understand the consequences, the actions that they need not to do, the do's and the don'ts generally? And are these allocations effective to the extent of forestalling such a catastrophe that we are witnessing across the country, of flooding that is washing off irrigation schemes that is having an impact on livelihoods?
There are things that we need to think as a country. I attended that conference in Makueni, and I remember...
Actually, you were
there. Yes, yes. And if you can remember the issues that were discussed, the commitment, I chaired one of the sessions, and you could see the need for dealing with things that we are supposed to be working on. We are a country that is very keen on clearing and making sure that we are seen to be doing things, but the follow-up is a challenge. And at least this crisis needs to teach us a lesson that we must come together. Politics aside, this is not the time that you want to attack the president or the government and anything. This is a crisis that we need to be able to come together to deal with. We have laws that are in place. Our preparedness is supposed to be very clear. The national safety networks that we are supposed to be working on to respond to, we are supposed to follow up. Whose responsibility is it supposed to be? Is it just the county? How much awareness is there that has been put for people to understand the importance of using professionals to deal with what they are supposed to be dealing with? Funds are available, set aside. But the implementation becomes a problem. Institutions that are supposed to be supported to deal with what we are supposed to be working on are not being given the support that they need. Today, if you talk about the meteorological department, it's doing a good job. But is that enough? Do they have enough money that we can be able to support them with all the modern systems so that it is real-time update? Today they are struggling because they have to rely on information from different places. Don't we have money at the county level? Money that is being misused? Money that people should take responsibility and deal with? These are the things, and as I say time and again, we need to get back. Where did the rain start beating us? What can we be able to stand and deal with? What is that personal responsibility that I must take that is going to make the change, not from very far, from my own area, where I live, where my mother is living, where my family is concerned? What are we doing? And that personal responsibility, I've taken it to different levels.
Yeah.
But because we can talk, we can discuss the mega issues, but that individual space is where we value life. You know,
and the ultimate responsibility of making sure that that person at the bottom end of the pyramid to get the information to make sure that there are services for him to not be a casualty of this climate crisis that we're witnessing is a leadership responsibility, is it?
Yes, yes.
May I? Sorry,
yes, please,
come
yes,
in on
yes.
this one.
Yes.
Well, this point that both of my brothers are talking about of the sort of the coming together. So the harsh realities are the following. Number one, we know that emergency is going to pile on emergency, that disaster is going to pile on disaster because of the climate change. And we also know that the resources at the international level are not going to be enough. So that puts a premium on us not just coming together, but working out how best to come together. So within the context of the response that Idris and I are involved with, there are already 90 entities that come together in that. 9 UN agencies, Kenya Red Cross, and another 80 national and international NGOs. The coordination challenge there is already enormous. That part of the response is allowing us to reach about 126,000 people right now out of the, and you said it, nearly 300,000 people affected. So the remaining more than a half, right, that's national and county government. So how do we work out how best and intensively to coordinate together? And that is a challenge. The relationship, the coordination between national and county government levels, I think, has very dramatically improved over the 12 years of devolution, but there is still a distance to go. And then how we interface with that. That's why the Deputy President, of course, brought us all together in Karen earlier this week. You were showing some of the footage from that earlier. But we need to continue to work on that national disaster response architecture. And interestingly, it's a coincidence or it's not, there's a piece of legislation going through Parliament, going through the National Assembly right now called the National Disaster Risk Management Bill that aims to overhaul the country's architecture for both the emergency and the longer term response, it's critical that we get that right, because we're going to be doing this for a long time to come. The bad news for Kenya and for Kenyans is that if we together, and we will, get through this flood emergency, we're going to be back in a drought. The pendulum is going to go back the other way very quickly. Some of the forecasts are already showing we might be in drought again by the end of the year. So this whiplash, this pendulum between feast and famine, flood and drought, is going to not only continue, it's going to intensify. So unless we get this piece right, this coordination right, this maximization of the resources that we do have, and that we start investing in disaster risk reduction, we're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, some of the interventions, before even I maybe you ask your next question, is you can hear the effort, and I salute the multi-stakeholders that are coming. Great effort from last year, great effort by the government, all that. You can mention and you say that it will be supporting about 126,000 people. Even if it went to 500,000 people, it's still a lot. But how many more are remaining behind there? And that is the space that I am driving us to be able to, because show a Kenyan how to make money, that they can buy food, that they can take their children to school, they will go in that direction. And that is the mass movement that we need to create, that we can empower people. These people are hopeless. They don't have any hope because they are just sitting, waiting. Now that there is a stakeholder meeting, we are going to be given some money, we are going to be given support. How many more are you going to be? Even if the amount went to $1 billion or $1 billion US and all that, it will still not be enough. But if we create, in addition to the great job that you're doing, the training of the masses, the education on value of human life, because we have lost value of human life in Kenya. That we only wake up after about 50 people die, one person is not that important. Look at how we are responding. That basic is what we need to now start working on, so that what Red Cross and what UN is coming and development agencies are coming, they are coming on top of what Kenyans understand that they need to do, where they need to live, why they can be, what they can be able to do this, how their money is and distributed at the county level. What is that money doing, as opposed to a few people that they can understand that their decision leads to what it is. And then, as I finish on that, involvement of our very important professionals. I'll give you an example in a place called Manuga in Maragua, where professionals hydrologists noticed a crack in a school. The same crack was somewhere noticed on the road, and they took their own individual approach to deal with a disaster that was going to be a serious landslide. They then went ahead to divert the water that was coming in so that it stops soaking in, so that it can lead to this. This is Professor Mathu of SECU, who did this together with others. And they averted an entire landslide that was going to cost lives many years back. And today, it is safe. When can we have our own people taking their small individual steps to add into what our team members are doing for the immediate, so that we are a community that is moving in a way that is going to change.
Which brings out the aspect of awareness and the need to convey that message up to the Mwananchi down there. Dr. Ahmed, coming to you, in regards to this discussion around the flooding across the country, it's not only water that is ravaging farmlands, families, and destructing people's lives, but also water that is going to waste. How can we then take advantage of this? Because by the end of the year, if, as per the predictions given by the UN, that we are likely going to experience drought, it's going to be, again, a deja vu altogether, reaching out to people who have no food because of the dry season. And now we're experiencing the rainy season where people still have no food because the farmlands have been washed away. I mean, what's the advantage out of this crisis? And how can we better use that water to our advantage?
Yeah, so just a quick comment on where Dr. Kalua left. I think, Dr. the communities are engaged a lot at the community level on their own strategies for disaster risk reduction. In fact, if you look at the kind of contribution addition we are making, most of the time I feel like we are taking credit for something that is done at community level. Yeah. And so the issue will be how we provide the right information, the right resources and assets to be able to deliver community risk reduction strategies at that level. But your point is well taken. We can't have an effective disaster risk management architecture without basing it at the community level. Community risk reduction is the basis of an effective disaster risk management architecture. But now coming to your question, yes, the irony, too much water today, and in a few months we'll be talking about too little water. And so collectively, I think the discussion has been around how do we improve our infrastructure so that we are able to capture this water, preserve and use it for gainful purposes, yeah, agriculture and reducing poverty in this community. What we have to remember is the development projects that we are talking about, as Dr. Jackson mentioned earlier, are not cheap investments. They're huge infrastructure investments. And for a country, a developing country that is using, in excess of 90% of its annual budget on recurrent expenditure, with a big part of that on repayment on past loans, we have a limitation around what kind of resources are available for that level of developmental work. So let me give you an example. Two projects that have been mooted, one along Tana River and one, I think, along River Nyando. Yeah. If these two projects were to be implemented, then they will have, change the face of the country, reduce first the flooding problem and provide more water for agriculture. But just one single project is costing about, the last I looked at, about $25 billion, the one on Nyando, and that was a number of years ago, so it must be more expensive than that. So the solution that we are looking at, it's easy to point out, to say we need dams, to preserve the water. But the cost architecture of the country, the financial, the public finance architecture of the country does not give us a lot of room for that kind of maneuver. Which now brings us to the second question. Yeah. And this is the discussion that we've been pushing for, is to say, as we indicated earlier, that developed countries who have been causing this problem have to avail more resources for this adaptation kind of work. Kenya requires 65 billion until, for the next few years to be able to put up this kind of massive infrastructure development projects to support us with capture. I had the honor of attending a meeting at the leadership level where chaired by the president, as we were talking about the last floods, the El Nino floods, and the comment from him was very clear. I wish we had these dams in place at this point in time, because at least we will have had enough water in the dams to support our communities for growth. What we hope is we will not use this same excuse 10 years from now. I think that's the expectation in the public. Right. That 10 years from now, we will not say we wish we had dams, and we will be celebrating the fact that we have dams. And there is a responsibility on all of us to contribute to that effort. Yeah,
Dr. Stephen, coming to you. When it comes to the personal impact, I mean, there were farmers who yesterday we interviewed when their irrigation scheme was washed away, the Pekeda irrigation scheme in Baringo South. And their statements resonate or are a reflection of what we also heard from the other farmers in a village where I visited on Saturday called Galili village in Garsen, the county of Tana River, that this has not only washed away their homes, but also drastically reduced their spending power because they have no money in their pocket. It's no longer they can't afford anything. They will not be able to pay school fees because their farmlands are underwater, completely swept away. Is the human impact also one that, as multi-stakeholders, you focus on, besides rebuilding their lives in general, that they get the seeds that are required and to the extent of providing the advice needed on how even you can provide the climate seeds that can withstand climate change with regards to what we are witnessing at the moment, because the next cycle will be again drought?
No, absolutely. Let me just nuance one thing that we said before I go on to answer that. I wouldn't want Kenyans to be despairing already and saying, oh my goodness, there's a drought coming by the end of the year, the UN says so. What I've seen is long-range forecasts, some of them, that say that there's a significant risk of that. So it's a point of alarm. It's not yet a certainty. What is a certainty is, given the climate crisis, that there will be a drought along again this year or next year or the year after. We know that these are coming harder and harder and faster and faster. In terms of the impact at the individual level, oh my goodness, yes. And what you tell me about the farmers with whom you spoke reminds me, first of all, of what I was hearing from the city dwellers here in Mathare, where I was just about a week ago with the deputy president. But also what we were hearing from farmers up north during the drought, those who'd lost all of their livestock, therefore not just their livelihoods, but in a sense the meaning of their lives as well. And we have to be hugely sensitive to that. In terms of the immediacy of the response, of course, as the United Nations, we have to think first about the physical well-being. And so that's why the World Health Organization has already pre-positioned and distributed medical kits that will cover, I think, urgent support medically for 2.5 million people. It's why we've been doing shelter through IOM. It's why we've been doing food and cash through World Food Programme. It's why we've been doing nutritional support and water and sanitation support through UNICEF. It's why UNHCR has been stepping up its support to the refugees, who we haven't talked about yet. And Dadaab, I'm told, is largely underwater, the refugee camp. So there's a hierarchy, if you like, of need. Probably the top need right now is the one right on the front page this morning, cholera. 34 cases in Tana. I believe that between government and national and international partners, we'll be able to contain it. We've contained cholera before, but it's a significant concern. Then you think about shelter, you think about food, and when you've got through those immediate needs, that's when those existential questions start to pose themselves. You've got populations whose lives perhaps you've been able to help saving, but then what does the future look like for them? What does a climate-adapted future look like for the Kenyan farmer? She's seen her shamba washed away. She's seen that sweat equity that she put into digging drainage and digging irrigation washed away. Maybe, for good reasons, government at either national or county level is saying, it makes no sense for you to try and make a livelihood where you were. So she's maybe being faced with a reality of moving her and her family somewhere completely different. I think we can't imagine the enormity of that impact on ordinary Kenyans. And we have to be finding a way, and I think my two brothers have been pressing this point all the way through our conversation this morning. We have to find a way of both being able to respond to that urgent, immediate need, but also doing something about the future.
Okay. Dr. Ahmed, is the situation different for refugees? Because Kakuma and Dadaab are two different scenarios when you speak about the conditions there already before even it started raining. And how are you responding? What's the picture out of the refugees across the country?
Yeah, so sadly, as Dr. Jackson indicated, that the two refugee camps have been affected by the current flooding, both Dadaab and Kakuma Kalobey, because they're part of the country anyway. This is happening in a context in which the total resources available to support refugee work in the country has been reducing over a period of time. As we speak, the food rations, I think, for refugees has fallen up to below 50%.
Yeah, it's 40%.
40%, so of what ordinarily is needed. So it puts a very difficult, it has a very difficult impact on the UNHCR and other agencies, including the Kenya Red Cross, who are supporting an implementation of programs. What we have to remember also in the context of discussion of refugees is this long debate around whether refugees are receiving better resources than the host communities and so on. But now I think the overall government policy in the country is to create reduce the gap in that debate between the refugee population and the host population with the Shirika plan and so on. So like many other people at risk, vulnerable population, the population of refugees continue to be put at higher risk than what they should be facing. A quick one.
Yes,
just,
you wanted to make a
just
point,
wanted to make a point, just a
yeah.
follow-up on what Dr. Stephen Jackson indicated. As an institution, our concern is not just the current emergency. One, we have two-pronged approach. We're looking at how do we recover, and there's a team coincidentally that is actively looking at recovery measures as we speak, with others doing the planning for the response. But also there's a positive side to the rains. There is the possibility of increased agricultural production, yes, especially in areas that ordinarily receive below rainfall. And in the last season, the El Nino period, very beautiful stories from the Ukambani region. We supported farmers with seeds, basic input, to boost their agriculture, and the harvests were just splendid. And so we need to be looking at supporting the positive elements around the increased rainfall, and I think that brings us back to the point that you made. Yeah. Why we're not investing better in dams that collect water for this kind of agriculture. One final point. When we started this discussion, I indicated that we have a complex emergency, multiple risks existing side by side. These risks meet at one point, at the point that it affects specific humans. There's a human face to it. There are families that were losing their lives and livelihoods. As a country, at the end of the day, we have to be very aggressive in the process we use to identify these people and to extend, social protection measures to them, and just basically leverage on the range of envelopes that are available to help them come out of this difficult situation. The government social protection mechanism will have to be activated at a different level to be able to target the most affected after this recovery period. All of us agencies who have other cash support interventions measures need to also repurpose them so that they can help the communities come out of it. But we have to also be worried as a nation that this country will be forced to repurpose its budget so that it can deal with the immediate needs of this particular flood. And that is, I think, what is giving the public policy makers a headache. As they repurpose those funds to support the current emergencies, what do we do in terms of addressing the development plans that were put in place here? I don't envy them, that one.
Yes, the load of responsibility that's waiting for them. Dr. Kalua, what are the advantages out of this crisis? What is it that we can earn, we can gain from this crisis that we're witnessing at the moment?
Great opportunities. First of all, there is going to be a lot of funding because it's already a crisis.
There is none.
Let me say this, and I'm saying it with a lot of openness in this process. When you hear 900 million Kenya shillings being available, that is money that was not there. And therefore, I'm saying there is going to be a lot of money. How we spend it is most important. I am talking as a member of Red Cross, as a life member. In Kitui, for example, today, they don't have a car. They are depending on a vehicle that is being sent from headquarters to go and collect data. Data and information is very important. How can a whole county not have a vehicle from Red Cross? That money could even do well in getting a vehicle for 1 million shillings, 2 million shillings. For that, that is an opportunity. There is an opportunity to build institutions to become better.
Yes.
We are talking of meteorological department. They need things that they can be able to use. Their radio station needs to be revamped so that every Kenyan can be able to get information that is going to be used. This is an opportunity to repurpose the budget, as you have very well put the same.
And there's also a bill in Parliament.
Yes, a big one for that matter. Yeah. This is an opportunity for people to understand that corruption kills. A great opportunity that if you have been cutting trees in the forest, if you have been doing messes in different places, then you are actually the person causing deaths, the person causing people to move, the person causing... So it's an opportunity in that matter. This is an opportunity to do things for real, to make sure that Kenyans understand what action they can take. It is good that we can give them seed. It is good that we can show them how to do these things. How practical is it for leaders to do these things so that people can learn by seeing, touching, and feeling? This is an opportunity for county governments, as you have said, to look at how we can be able to place responsible people and allocate the funds depending on the priority as per the community itself. I'm now not talking about what is my norm in terms of how you can make money. Okay. It is an opportunity to show people how they can actually make money, how they can be able to create entrepreneurships, how they can be able, it's mind-boggling at mega level and even at micro level, so that we can be able, the opportunities are vast, and that's where we now need to focus and be able to deal. There is a lot of money, a lot that is going to be there.
Yes. I'll come to you, Dr. Ahmed. Yes.
So I appreciate, Ayub, that for a farmer whose livelihood has been destroyed, hearing that crisis is opportunity must sound rather hollow right now. But it is crisis is opportunity, at least for us in this conversation. I think in three ways, and Dr. Green has touched on them. The first is at the international level. So as it happens, over the next 3 days here in Nairobi, we have a major gathering of global civil society. That's part of the process building up towards the Secretary General's Summit of the Future to happen in New York in September. And you can imagine, I mean, the title gives it away. The Summit of the Future is looking at existential issues for the planet. So the opportunity that we have to show global civil society the reality of the climate emergency. They're coming to Nairobi, they're arriving today, the meeting opens today, and they will be seeing for themselves. So as an advocacy opportunity first at the international level, and to really build this, these points that we've been saying. The second is institutionally, you're absolutely right. This is an opportunity and an obligation to get the institutional architecture of disaster response right through the bill, and also to continue strengthening our ability to respond together, to coordinate better. And then investment, Ayub, and we've talked about this. So here's a little bit of a slightly glib one. We had a major drought that began in 2021. It was half as bad as it might have been, and that's not to take away from the suffering. It's half as bad as it might have been had we not had a decade's worth of investment through a thing called the Ending Drought Emergencies Initiative. Investing in promoting resilience works. It brought down the case numbers by about a half. So we know that investing in disaster-proofing Kenya works, and we actually also know that you can make money out of it, and that was the point of the Africa Climate Summit. So there is opportunity in all of this, and I think that the reality, the stark reality of the situation that we're seeing on the front pages focuses our attention. The question is, can collectively Kenya and international partners use this moment to do something positive for the future?
Okay. Yes, Ahmed.
While we're still on the spirit of opportunities, one of the positive things that we can learn from this particular emergency is how well designed, effective national institutions, what they can do in terms of supporting their communities deal with this kind of crisis. And I think if we haven't learned a lesson from that in terms of the work of the Kenya Red Cross as a national asset, as a national institution, if it is well invested in, if it has the resources, that it can be an integral component of the community responding mechanism, then we'll never learn that lesson. We have a global problem, and this is an opportunity, and I think this is an emphasis, including to Dr. Stephen Jackson, for the global development partners to understand that it is unacceptable that only 1.2% of the total funding assistance globally goes to national institutions. It is completely unacceptable. We cannot have effective national response mechanisms if we do not invest in local actors. And that's one of the major opportunities that we're talking about. So, Dr. Kalua, most of the time, even when funding is available, it goes to the wrong places. It goes to channels that take longer to reach the local community. By the time we have the programs implemented, a huge part of it has been consumed in administrative costs and other costs.
Let's correct it now. That's the opportunity.
That's another discussion that we'll be having, is that our assistance program, are they designed to be effective? Are they designed to be community-centered? And are they in the interests of the countries that are receiving them? And this is a conversation that as an institution we've decided to lead globally. And by the way, this is an important point that I feel that I should indicate. Many of you have been asking us, where did you get the investment on the boats that you're using for the response? And it's a very simple answer. That was an investment from the government. So about a year ago, when we met with the president and he visited the Kenya Red Cross, we put a proposal to him to say, make an investment as the government in the capacity of the institution. And it's that investment that we are making good use of at the moment. So we'll be pushing the parliamentarians, the policy makers to allocate more resources to the national institution.
All right, and we'll sample the feedback shortly, and as we wrap up, Dr. Stephen, come to you on this because it's very important. And the UN is, of course, prioritizes education as a key agenda item. And the current situation has forced first a week of postponement of schools reopening, and later up until further notice by the government in the presidential address. This is worrying, isn't it? Especially in the context of the Kenyan education system, where the social divide is so huge, especially those who go to public institutions.
It's absolutely a concern. Where we were visiting the flood displaced in Mathare was in a school, and that school needed to reopen. So how do you slice that? How do you balance the needs of those who are displaced with the need to get kids back to school? And that's a major concern. It's something that the UN in Kenya is working on with government, UNICEF and UNESCO and others, are really trying to see, first of all, how we can get the schools back open that can open, how we can move the populations that are in the schools to other places that are safe so we can get the schools back up and running, and how we can get education to those kids who are displaced. School in a box, temporary solutions of that kind, of course, using online as well. Bitterly, we have some experience of that from COVID, don't we? So that's a major priority, and it forms part of that break that I keep talking about, that drag on Kenya's development overall. Lost education is a price that we end up paying for a generation.
Yes, Doctor, you have a brief remarks final.
Dr. Jackson has just put it very well, and I want to say there is much more money in the hands of the entrepreneurs in this country than there is in the government. In as much as the government is doing what they're doing, and we really appreciate, we need to call upon and create a policy that brings everybody together, that brings the private sector, that we induce them or even just make them get some rebate of some sort on taxes, so that the boats that we are now getting from this is not just from the government. It is actually a business that someone is known somewhere, that there is an opportunity that they can put to make money, even as they support livelihoods, because we need that. That policy needs to be driven in a way that is so strategic, that even making our country better in terms of ensuring that more trees are planted, ensuring that water management is done. As we talk about big dams, we are also talking of an opportunity of a small business person creating a small dam, creating sand dams along the way, that we can be able to be resilient when time comes, and also our individual responsibility to make change. If we don't make those things now, it will be too late, and we will be just in and out. The cycle of rain and drought is 5-year cycle. It keeps coming up and about.
Yes,
and
Dr.
we must be ready.
No, so my final comment, today is the World Red Cross.
And you are heading to Baringo after
Yes,
this, right?
and today is the World Red Cross Day, so I think it's an opportunity for me to celebrate all the volunteers all over the world.
I wish you had told me overnight, you would have prepared you some cake here.
Yeah, true. We can still receive the cake. And I think the message for me is to all the volunteers who are risking their lives all over the country. We really appreciate you. We value you. Asanteni sana.
Thank you. Let's now sample the feedback, and Before we wrap the broadcast here, this is what you are saying on X, formerly Twitter, and the hashtag is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Oleshonko says floods have wreaked havoc, but the aftermath is just as dire. Hunger will grip our nation as agriculture has suffered. It's clear solving this crisis will take more than just funds. It demands sustainable strategies and swift action. Sir Nixon Degore says, unfortunately, huge tracts of safe land on higher grounds are owned by very few individuals. If only they can surrender the lands to be occupied by those who are being urged to move to higher grounds. Babu Michelle K says, since the floods or heavy rains and the impact as evident, the Kenya Red Cross has responded very adequately and in good time than other crisis response teams. The national government and the county governments should learn from the Red Cross team on how they do it. Team Kenya says on climate change, Kenya has remained theoretical and skeptical just to attract foreign funding, and nothing happened on the ground completely. By the end of the year, people will be dying of drought. Which is the real climate change? Kalu_Lepario says floods devastate more than just infrastructure. They upend farmers' lives, threatening food security. The aftermath is a looming food crisis we can't ignore. It's time for urgent action and long-term resilience planning. And Esau says, in the wake of floods, the true test of resilience begins as communities grapple with loss and damage. Let's unite in support, kindness, and rebuilding efforts. Together, we can overcome adversity and emerge stronger. Let the government step in where possible. Thank you for waking up with the broadcast here on Daybreak. Dr. Stephen Jackson is the United Nations Resident Coordinator here in Kenya. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Kalua Isaac Green is an ecopreneur and environmentalist. Thank you so much. Dr. Ahmed Idris was here last night with my colleague Yvonne Okwara on The Explainer, here with us also this morning, heading to Baringo County. Thank you, Dr. for your time. He is the Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross. And thank you to you too for waking up with us here on the broadcast. We'll see you on Friday morning here on the broadcast. Up next is Health and Lifestyle with Safina Chiengoma. Till then, good morning.